So I've been going over Tony Giovanni's book, The Pizza Bible, and learning, reading, experimenting, testing his theories. This week, what I did was I tested his theory that you want to use ice cold water when making pizza dough. I know he's not the only guy doing this, but the theory is if you use ice water, then the development of the yeast fermentation process slows down, and that's going to make the crust taste better. Generally speaking, the longer you let the dough ferment, the more flavor it's going to have. I did one experiment a few months back where I made 4 dough balls, one using the same day pizza dough recipe. Second one was overnight fermentation in the fridge. Third one was a 3-night cold ferment. And then the fourth one was a 5-night cold ferment. And what I observed was that the overnight ferment had a lot more flavor than the same day ferment. And then the 3-day ferment had a lot more flavor than the overnight ferment, but the 5-day ferment did not have any more flavor than the 3-day ferment. It tasted the same. So it kind of maxed out there for me, but generally speaking, the longer the dough ferments for, the more flavor it's going to have. So Tony is saying use ice cold water because the colder the yeast is, within reason, it's going to delay the fermentation process, slow it down. It's going to give you more flavor, in theory. So I thought I'd test that. So here's what I did. Oh, he also uses, his main recipe has a 3-day cold ferment, so that's what I did. I made 2 dough balls. One, the water was room temperature, and then the second one was ice cold water. And my room temperature water right now is probably around 73 to 75 degrees. And so I mixed the dough balls. I let them rest, both rest at room temperature for about 30 minutes. Then I put them in the fridge, and they stayed in the fridge for about 68 hours. So 3 nights. And then I took them out and let them both, I took them out at the same time, let them ferment at room temperature for about 6 hours before I baked them. And here's what I observed. They were the exact same. They looked the same. They tasted the same. The density, everything was just the exact same. As a side note, you'll notice that this crust is a little more colorful than it usually is. That's because I usually do an overnight ferment for these experiments. This 3-day ferment does give it a really nice brown golden color, as you can see. I think what's going on is when you use the ice cold water, it's going to slow down the yeast development, but only for a short while. You mix it together, and on a side note, when I took the dough ball out of the KitchenAid with the ice cold water, the dough is actually really cohesive, and it didn't stick to the bowl and didn't stick to my hands, which I really appreciated. If I was doing a high volume of dough, I would use ice cold water just for that reason. It makes it so much easier to work with. But if you think about it, you're mixing in ice cold water. Maybe that water was like 34, 35 degrees, but my fridge is like 40 or 42 degrees. And you mix in 34-degree water with flour that's just, it's 73 degrees. So the middle ground, that dough ball was probably somewhere in the 50s room temperature, right? Whereas when I use the room temperature water, the dough ball is probably somewhere it would have been in the 70s, right? So if you think about it, a 50-something degree dough ball versus a 70-something degree dough ball, you put them both in the fridge, that's 40 to 42 degrees, and it's only going to be a matter of minutes. I mean, maybe an hour at the most before both dough balls are equalized and brought down to that 40 to 42 degree temperature. And so, in other words, using the ice cold water, it may work differently if you did a warm ferment overnight or 12-hour ferment, if you're making pizza napoletana or something. But when you just put it in the fridge, you're getting equalized right away. The cold fermented dough ball slow down the dough, for what, an hour? So in other words, over the course of 68 hours, the one dough ball with the ice cold water fermented a tiny bit slower for one of those hours. And that's just so nominal. It's not going to make a difference. So with that experiment, and by the way, Tony's main recipe is a 3-day cold ferment also. So I don't know. I'm gonna do his exact recipe soon, and see if it's any different. But until then, my general thoughts are that using ice cold water and when you're doing a cold ferment is just something the eccentric artist would do. It doesn't make a difference. Both of these crusts tasted really good, but they were just the exact same. The bottoms were the same, the puffiness was the same, the stretchiness was the same, they tasted the same. So that's that. Let me know if you have any different results. Thanks.